say the veil between worlds is thinnest in New Orleans. A city that wears its history like a shroud, heavy with perfume and regret. I never bought into it, not really, until I started polishing glasses behind the mahogany at the last call. It's tucked away down a cobblestone alley in the French Quarter, the kind gas lamps forget, and tourists never find, where the first unspoken rule, the one I inherited with the tarnished keys, is you always keep the numbers for a priest, a rabbi, and an imam tucked beside the antique cash register. Some customers, you see, need more than just a perfectly mixed Sazerac before they can finally settle their tab and move on. The air in here always hangs thick, a potent cocktail of aged wood, spilled bourbon, the ghosts of 1,000 forgotten cigars, and a faint, unidentifiable sweetness like funeral flowers left too long in the sun. That old brass till, the one with the cherubic face worn smooth by time, it has a disconcerting habit of ringing up phantom orders, a ghostly kaching, echoing in the quiet moments when no one's within 10 feet of it. My predecessor, a gaunt, quiet man named Elias, who always smelled faintly of dust and despair. He told me the third rule. If they start confessing instead of ordering, son, you just pour strong and listen deep. Right before he up and vanished, one misty morning, leaving behind only a half-finished absinthe and a single, scuffed child-sized patent leather shoe, sitting primly by the storeroom door. My name is Noah Reyes, ex-army, ex-psychologist, current purveyor of spirits, both liquid and increasingly the other kind. The army taught me how to dissect trauma. The VA taught me how futile that often was. Now, I mix drinks, the precise ritual of it, the measure, the stir, the pour. It's a small, controllable piece of order in a world that feels increasingly unhinged. Tonight, like most nights, the bar was a study in shadows and hushed conversations. Jack Holloway, my co-bartender, moved with his usual spectral grace, wiping down the counter, humming some old mournful jazz tune under his breath. He never seemed to sweat, never seemed to tire, and he had this uncanny knack for knowing, just knowing, when one of our quieter regulars was about to drift in. A faint shimmer by the far end of the bar, near the ancient clouded mirror that never quite reflected the room accurately. A man materialized, dapper in a slightly out-of-style suit, a phantom gardenia in his lapel. Old Louis, the trumpet player. He'd come in like this twice a week for the past month. Order a vieux carré he never touched. And recount, in a voice like rustling silk, the precise moment his solo faltered on Basin Street, the high C he could never quite hit before the embolism took him. He'd sigh, the gardenia would droop, and he'd fade like old smoke. Tonight was no different. Jack just nodded once, a faint smile playing on his lips, and started mixing Louis' usual before the poor man even fully coalesced. And I watched it happen, the familiar unease prickling my skin. Just exhaustion, I told myself. The quarter, the late hours, too much imagination. The bell above the heavy oak door, a bell that rarely announced anyone tangible, gave a low, sorrowful chime. It was a sound that seemed to suck the warmth from the room. The gas lamps outside flickered violently for a moment, casting a strobe of distorted shadows. Jack paused, his hand hovering over a bottle of rye, his humming ceasing abruptly. He looked towards the door, not with surprise, but with a kind of quiet, almost reverent anticipation. And then she drifted in, a woman, or the ghost of one, wreathed in an aura of profound, bone-chilling sorrow. She wore a wedding dress, once white, now the color of old ivory in grave mold, its lace hem tattered and stained with something dark, like dried poppies. Her veil was askew, revealing a face pale as moonlight, streaked with tears that seemed to shimmer and vanish before they hit the floor. The scent of lilies, overpowering and funereal, washed over the bar, along with a cold so intense my teeth began to chatter. She glided to the bar, her movements fluid and unnatural, and her voice, when she finally spoke, was a whisper of shattered glass and autumn leaves. Hey, he promised me forever. The spectral bride's grief was a physical presence in the bar, a crushing weight that made the very air feel thick and hard to breathe. The temperature plummeted further. Intricate frost patterns, like skeletal lace, began to creep across the surface of the antique mirror behind the bar. Jack, his face unnervingly serene, simply placed a clean-cut crystal glass before her, no question asked. "Marigold," she whispered, her voice like the rustle of decaying silk. "My name was Marigold Lance." Her spectral gaze, luminous and lost, fixed on me. "He killed me on our wedding night, left me in the soil like a discarded bloom." A single, perfect spectral tear traced a path down her cheek, leaving a faint, shimmering trail that evaporated almost instantly. The scent of lilies intensified, mingled now with the unmistakable cloying odor of damp earth. "Who, Marigold?" I asked, my voice barely a croak. My training, the part of me that still tried to impose logic on the illogical, screamed that this was a stress-induced hallucination, a particularly vivid manifestation of my own unresolved anxieties. But the cold was real. The frost on the mirror was real. "The doctor," she breathed, a faint, ethereal mist escaping her lips. "From the Chandler Institute. He collected us." Collected? My blood ran cold. There were six of us, like flowers pressed in a dark book. I was the fifth. But the sixth glass, he never named her, never found her. "She's still waiting?" Her form flickered, her outline blurring for a moment, as if the effort of speaking, of remembering, was almost too much for her fragile ectoplasmic form. "The Chandler Institute for Cognitive Rehabilitation." The name snagged in my memory. I'd seen it before, on a dilapidated, vine-covered sign on the outskirts of the Garden District. A place long shuttered, whispered about in local lore as a house of horrors. Before I could process further, the beaded curtain to the back room parted, and Sister Camille Moreau entered. She was a woman who seemed to carry the weight of centuries in her sharp, knowing eyes. Her presence a curious blend of earthy pragmatism and otherworldly intensity. She always smelled of sulfur, lavender, and freshly brewed chicory coffee. She paused, her gaze sweeping the room, landing on Marigold with an unreadable expression. "The air in here is thick tonight, Noah," she said, her voice raspy. "Sorrow attracts sorrow. Best not let it curdle the good bourbon." She gave Marigold a long, appraising look. Some souls, they carry their prisons with them. Lighter, after Marigold had faded with a final heartbreaking sigh, leaving behind only the lingering scent of lilies and a patch of impossible cold on the bar top, I started digging. A quick search online confirmed it. Chandler Institute closed down 30 years ago after a massive scandal involving patient abuse and unorthodox, some said depraved, experimental treatments. My hands were shaking. Jack, wiping down the bar with his usual unnerving calm, merely hummed a few bars of St. James Infirmary blues. As I scrolled through grainy online newspaper archives, a small, almost overlooked article from 1988 caught my eye. Bridal tragedy in Bayou St. John. Marigold Lance, 22nd, found murdered. Police baffled. Suspect described as a John Doe, briefly a patient at the controversial Chandler Institute, now missing. My heart hammered against my ribs. This wasn't just a ghost story anymore. This was a cold case. The days following Marigold's visitation were different. The usual melancholy ambience of the last call deepened, taking on a sharper, more desperate edge. It was as if her sorrow had been a signal flare in the spectral hinterlands. More spirits began to find their way to our door, their forms less defined than old Louis, their confessions more fragmented, more urgent, a soldier in a tattered uniform, forever reliving a moment of battlefield terror, muttering about bright lights and metallic screams. A young woman in a faded hospital gown, whispering about cold hands and the sting of needles, her eyes darting nervously towards the corners of the room, as if expecting something to lurch from the shadows. Many of them I noted with a growing sense of dread, made fleeting, disjointed references to institutional settings, to sterile rooms, and the hushed clinical tones of unseen doctors. I started a ledger, a cheap notebook hidden beneath the bar. The confession ledger, I morbidly dubbed it. Dates, descriptions, snippets of their whispered woes. Patterns began to emerge, faint threads connecting their disparate traumas. The name Chandler was a recurring whisper, a venomous echo. My own nights became a landscape of fractured sleep and vivid, sweat-soaked nightmares. Sergeant Miller, the patient I'd lost, the one whose last words, "Will you still listen if I return later, Doc?" had become the silent, accusatory soundtrack to my waking life, now featured prominently. His face, gaunt and despairing, would sometimes morph into the faces of the bar's spectral patrons, his voice blending with their sorrowful confessions. I was drinking too much coffee, not enough water, existing in a perpetual state of sleep-deprived hypervigilance. One afternoon, a man walked in who was undeniably solid flesh and blood, though he carried his own kind of haunting. Detective Ronan Brigg, no PD, suspended, he later told me, for getting too close, for asking too many uncomfortable questions about cold cases nobody wanted to reopen. He was built like a retired linebacker, all hard angles and simmering frustration, his eyes bloodshot and wary. He wasn't looking for a drink, he was canvassing, showing a faded photograph of a smiling, dark-haired teenage girl. "Seen her?" he grunted, his voice rough. "College kid. Got a bit too interested in local ghost stories, specifically at Chandler Institute. I feigned ignorance, a knot of ice forming in my stomach. Later, I'd learned the girl was his daughter, Sarah, his only child, missing for 3 weeks. Jack, throughout all this, remained an island of unsettling calm. He'd suggest specific ingredients for my experimental cocktails, the ones I'd started creating for the spirits based on their stories. A dash of wormwood for bitterness, a sprig of rosemary for remembrance. It was uncanny, his intuition, almost as if he knew their palates, their specific emotional signatures. One evening, as the ghostly nurse in the faded gown whispered about a quiet room at Chandler, a place of unspeakable treatments, a place where Dr. Alistair Finch conducted his memory excisions, Jack softly began to hum a lullaby, an old Creole tune I hadn't heard in years. The nurse's spectral form flickered violently, and she let out a silent, agonized scream before dissolving. Jack just kept humming, polishing a glass as if nothing had happened. Nothing had happened. The name Dr. Alistair Finch became my new obsession. With a reluctant assist from Sister Camille, who, after I'd plied her with a rare bottle of chartreuse and a detailed account of Marigold's story, performed a disquieting ritual involving smoldering herbs and murmured incantations over a faded photograph of the Chandler Institute. Information began to surface. Finch had been a psychiatrist of considerable talent, a pioneer in trauma therapy, until his methods grew extreme. He became fixated on the idea that traumatic memories were a disease that could be surgically, or rather, psychically excised. His notes, sourced by Sister Camille through a shadowy network of contacts in the city's underbelly, spoke of soul scouring and memory voiding. He'd been dismissed in disgrace shortly before Chandler was shut down, but not before several patients had suffered catastrophic mental breakdowns, or had simply vanished from the records. Detective Brigg returned a few days later, the simmering frustration in his eyes now replaced by a raw, hollowed-out desperation. He'd admitted then about Sarah. She was writing a paper, he'd said, his voice cracking. On urban legends, on how places like Chandler become magnets for dark folklore. She found something, Noah. Something that scared her. She called me, said she'd found a hidden journal. Finch, she thought. Then, nothing. He slumped onto a bar stool, the fight seemingly gone out of him. They say I'm obsessed, that I'm seeing connections that aren't there. He looked at me then, a flicker of something new in his gaze. Not suspicion, but a dawning, horrified understanding. But you see them too, don't you? The shadows in this place. We formed an uneasy alliance, fueled by cheap coffee and shared dread. Brig provided access to old sealed police files on Chandler, reports filled with redacted names and chillingly clinical descriptions of patient incidents. I shared entries from my confession ledger. The overlap was undeniable. Some of the spirits I'd served, their stories of institutional trauma, their timelines. They matched disappearances from Chandler decades ago, but more disturbingly, some were more recent. A young man who'd vanished from a halfway house near the old institute grounds. Only 2 years prior had appeared at the bar last week, whispering about being invited to a quiet place by a soft-spoken man. The evil of Chandler, whatever it was, hadn't died with the building's closure. It was still active, or it had been reawakened. The very atmosphere of the last call seemed to thicken, the air growing heavy. The silence between spirit visitations charged with an unseen, unheard tension. The faint, sweet smell of decay, once only noticeable upon Marigold's arrival, now seemed a permanent fixture. Jack grew more withdrawn, his jazz humming becoming more frequent, almost a warding gesture, yet his eyes held a strange, watchful glint. He'd started leaving out a small antique silver bell on the back bar, polishing it obsessively when he thought I wasn't looking. One particularly oppressive evening, after a spirit resembling one of Briggs' cold case files had faded with a silent scream, Marigold reappeared. She was more agitated than I'd ever seen her, her form flickering wildly, the scent of grave dirt and lilies almost overpowering. She didn't speak, but glided towards an old, rarely touched liquor cabinet in the darkest corner of the bar. A heavy oak monstrosity that had been there since before Elias. Her translucent hand pointed, trembling, at the dusty floorboards beneath it. Her voice, when it came, was a choked, spectral sob, barely audible above the sudden violent rattling of the windows. He kept her there, buried like a forgotten sin, the sixth glass, under the weeping wood. Marigold's spectral finger, trembling like a leaf in a phantom wind, remained fixed on the floorboards beneath the ancient oak liquor cabinet. The air in the last call had become a physical weight, a suffocating blanket woven from sorrow, fear, and the cloying, sweet rot scent of something long dead and unhallowed. The windows didn't just rattle now. They shuddered in their frames as if an unseen giant were trying to beat its way in. Brig, his face a grim mask of resolve, was already beside me, his hand resting on the holstered weapon beneath his jacket, a useless gesture against the horrors we suspected, but a comfort nonetheless. The weeping wood, I murmured, recalling Marigold's words. The oak of the cabinet was dark, almost black with age, and indeed, in the flickering gaslight, it seemed to glisten with a perpetual, unnatural dampness. Together, Brig and I strained against the cabinet's immense weight. It groaned in protest, the sound like a coffin lid being forced open, scraping across the scarred floorboards with agonizing slowness. Beneath it, the wood was darker still, stained and warped, and there, almost invisible in the gloom, was the faint, unmistakable outline of a trapdoor, its edges nearly seamless with the surrounding planks. No handle, no hinges visible, just a subtle difference in the grain, a faint shadow line. Marigold drifted closer, her form flickering with an almost unbearable intensity. Her whispered pleas now a torrent of sorrowful urgency. Wow, a torrent of sorrowful urgency. She's there. He put her where no one would look. Finch, the doctor with the empty eyes, Sister Camille, who'd arrived unbidden minutes earlier, drawn by what she'd later describe as a cacophony on the spiritual plane, produced a tarnished silver crowbar from the depths of her voluminous black bag. Some doors are best left unopened. Noah, she said, her voice tight. But some secrets fester if they're not lanced. Without further ceremony, she wedged the tip of the crowbar into a hairline crack with a sickening splinter and a groan of ancient wood. The trapdoor gave way, revealing not a cellar, but a shallow, earthen pit, no more than 4 feet deep and 6 feet long. The air that rushed up was an abomination. Cold, fetid, thick with the smell of turned earth, decay, and an underlying, indescribably alien scent. Something like ozone and old blood. My stomach churned. Rigg aimed his powerful police flashlight into the void. The beam illuminated a cramped, claustrophobic space. The earthen walls were scored with crude, frantic carvings, spirals, eye-like sigils, and what looked like distorted human figures. In the center, half buried in the loose soil, lay a small skeletal hand, its delicate bones still clutching a tarnished silver locket, shaped like a star. The sixth glass, Sarah Briggs' voice was a ragged, broken whisper. He made a choke sound and started to lurch forward, but Sister Camille's hand shot out, gripping his arm like a vice. Detective, no, the ground here is hungry. It was then that Jack Holloway spoke, his voice cool and calm, cutting through the horrified silence like a shard of ice. He hadn't moved from behind the bar, where he'd been polishing the small antique silver bell with a soft cloth, his movements precise and unhurried. Impressive. I wondered how long it would take you to find Finch Little. Oubliette. We whirled to face him. His usual charming smile was in place, but it didn't reach his eyes. His eyes, they were different. The pupils were dilated, reflecting the dim light with a flat predatory sheen, like a nocturnal animal's. The faint, dissonant humming I'd often heard him make was louder now, a subtle, unnerving thrum that seemed to emanate from his very being. Jack? What the hell is this? I demanded, my voice hoarse. This, Noah, Jack said, placing the silver bell carefully on the bar top, is where the real therapy happens. Dr. Alistair Finch was a visionary, you see. He didn't want to just cure trauma. He wanted to understand its essence, to harness it. He took a step from behind the bar, his movements fluid, almost gliding. I was his most promising subject, his star patient, he called me. A cold dread, more profound than anything I'd felt before, began to uncoil in the pit of my stomach. Finch believed this place. Jack gestured around the bar. This very spot was a confluence, a weak point, a veil rift, as our good sister might call it. He nodded towards Camille, his smile widening. He didn't want to just listen to sorrows, Noah. He wanted to feed on them. Or rather, he wanted to feed it. His gaze flicked down towards the open pit, and for the first time, I felt it. A profound, ancient, and utterly malevolent presence emanating from the exposed earth. Not a ghost, not a spirit, but something older, vaster. A parasitic consciousness that thrummed with a silent, insatiable hunger. The collector bite. Finch ritual, Jack continued, his voice taking on a hypnotic cadence, was meant to bind the collector to his will, to grant him power over the spiritual detritus of the city. He botched it, of course. The entity was stronger than he anticipated. Jack's eyes seemed to glow faintly in the dim light. Finch died screaming. But I was at the epicenter. The ritual didn't kill me, it anchored me. He was a ghost. And it, to me, he was a ghost. Or something impossibly, terrifyingly in between. The incident at Chandler 5 years ago. It had been Jack's death. "The bar isn't a confessional, Noah," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, yet carrying over the sudden, oppressive silence. "It's a larder, a vessel. I draw them here. Their pain, their regret, their unfinished business. It's ambrosia to the collector, and in return..." He paused, a strange, ecstatic expression flickering across his face. "I get to stay. I don't fade. I don't get," claimed. Marigold's killer hadn't been some random patient. It had been Finch, experimenting, and Jack had been his accomplice, his heir. The subsequent victims, the spirits drawn to the last call. Jack had been curating them, keeping their agony fresh, feeding them piece by piece to the entity beneath our feet. Briggs' daughter, Sarah, hadn't just stumbled upon a cold case. She'd been targeted, her vibrant, youthful spirit a delicacy for the collector. Lured in by Jack, the thrumming from the pit intensified. The very floorboards vibrated. The shadows in the corners of the bar seemed to deepen, to coalesce, taking on vaguely humanoid shapes that writhed and twisted. The spirits who had been lingering, the faint regulars, cried out, a chorus of spectral terror as their forms began to waver, to dim, their ectoplasmic essence being visibly siphoned towards the open trapdoor. Marigold's form flickered violently, her screams silent but tearing through me as she tried to shield the pit, to shield the locket, her obsession now a desperate protective act. Sister Camille stepped forward, a crucifix fashioned from blackened iron in one hand, a vial of murky liquid in the other. "Abomination, you defile this sacred space, this nexus. The balance will not be undone by your parasitic hunger," she began to chant in Latin, her voice surprisingly powerful, resonant, pushing back against the encroaching darkness. Jack laughed, a dry, rasping sound. "Balance, sister, there is only hunger and satiety." He raised the small silver bell, "and it is time for the collector to truly feast." He rang the bell. The sound was not loud, but it pierced through the chaos, clear and chillingly pure. And from the pit, something rose. Not a body, not a shape, but a wave of absolute cold, of profound despair, a visible distortion in the air like heat haze over asphalt, but black, light devouring black. It surged towards us, and in its wake, the very essence of hope seemed to die. Briggs, roaring his daughter's name, fired his weapon into the rising darkness, the bullets passing through it with no effect, their impacts absorbed into the void. The true last call had been made, and the collector was answering. "Issime spiritus," she thundered, the iron crucifix held high. Marigold, her spectral form flickering like a dying candle flame, lunged towards the pit, towards the skeletal hand still clutching the locket. She seemed to be trying to shield it, to pull it free, her silent screams a counterpoint to Camille's exorcism. It was Briggs who broke the horrifying tableau, his face a mask of primal fury and unbearable grief. He roared Sarah's name again and charged, not at the formless horror, but at Jack. He tackled Jack with the force of a battering ram, the two of them crashing to the floor, the silver bell skittering away across the grimy wood. The effect was instantaneous. With Jack, its anchor, momentarily disrupted, the surging blackness faltered. The intense pressure lessened. The thrumming from the pit became ragged, disharmonious. The spirits in the bar, those not yet fully drained, seemed to regain a sliver of solidity. "The bell, Noah!" Sister Camille yelled, her face beaded with sweat, her knuckles white around the crucifix. "The conduit! Break it!" Jack, unnaturally strong, was fighting Briggs off, his fingers like iron talons raking at the detective's face. But Brig held on with desperate tenacity, roaring his pain and rage. I scrambled for the silver bell, its chill biting into my fingers. It pulsed faintly in my grip, resonating with the entity's foul energy. With a desperate cry, I slammed it against the sharp corner of the oak bar. The bell didn't break. It shattered, not like metal, but like black ice, exploding into 1,000 razor-sharp, light-devouring fragments. A soundless scream ripped through the bar, a psychic shockwave that threw me backwards. The rising blackness from the pit recoiled violently, imploding upon itself with a sound like a universe collapsing. Jack shrieked, a high, inhuman sound, his body arching, the faint light in his eyes extinguishing as if a switch had been thrown. He went limp in Brig's grasp. The oppressive atmosphere lifted, replaced by a sudden, aching emptiness. The remaining spirits, dazed and flickering, began to fade, not with terror this time, but with a kind of weary, translucent release. Marigold, her form almost entirely transparent, gave one last, sorrowful look towards the locket in the pit, then at me, a silent acknowledgement passing between us. And then, she too was gone. Brig, gasping, pushed himself off Jack's still form. Jack Holloway lay on the floor, no longer a conduit, no longer an anchor, just empty, a husk. Whether he was truly dead now, or merely disconnected, I couldn't say. The thrumming from the pit had ceased. A profound, almost unnerving silence settled over the last call. Sister Camille sagged against the bar, her breath coming in ragged gasps. It is subdued, for now. The vessel is broken. But the entity, it is bound to this ground, Noah. Ancient, it will hunger again. Brig crawled to the edge of the pit. He reached in, his hand trembling, and gently retrieved the tarnished silver locket. He clutched it to his chest, silent tears streaming down his face. Sarah, the sixth glass, her spirit, perhaps sensing her father's grief, her discovery, had found its release, not into the collector's maw, but into whatever peace awaited. The immediate aftermath was a haze of exhaustion and disbelief. Brig eventually called it in, a heavily edited version. A structural collapse, a squatter found dead. The pit was filled, concreted over by city workers who asked no questions. Jack Holloway's body was taken away, his death certificate citing unknown causes. A fittingly enigmatic end. The Chandler Institute's final, darkest secret was buried once more, though Sister Camille and I knew it was merely sleeping. Weeks turned into months. The last call, scrubbed clean of the physical taint of that night, reopened. It was quieter now. The oppressive, cloying sweetness was gone. The constant chill replaced by the familiar damp coolness of old New Orleans. Yet, the silence was different. It was the silence of a battlefield after the fighting has stopped, heavy with a new kind of awareness. I was different. The ghosts of my past, Sergeant Miller's questioning face, were still there. But they were no longer the solitary specters in my personal haunting. They now shared space with the memory of Marigold's sorrow, Jack's chilling smile, the absolute cold of the collector. My bartending became less a ritual of escape and more one of vigilance. I understood the rules now, not as quaint eccentricities, but as vital, fragile boundaries. The spirits still came, fewer perhaps. Their needs seemed less desperate, their confessions quieter, more melancholic. A musician still searching for a lost chord. A lover still waiting for a letter that never arrived. Unfinished business. The quiet hum of souls not yet ready or able to move on. I listened. I poured. I kept the numbers for the priest, the rabbi, and the imam close at hand. Detective Ronan Brigg became a semi-regular. He'd sit at the far end of the bar, nursing a single bourbon he rarely finished, clutching Sarah's locket. He never spoke of that night, but his eyes, when they met mine, held a shared, unspoken knowledge. Sometimes, when the bar was particularly quiet, I'd see him looking towards the door, a flicker of hope, or perhaps just enduring grief in his gaze. He was waiting, perhaps for Sarah to visit, to tell him she was okay, perhaps for something else entirely. One evening, a young man came in, charming, with an easy smile, and eyes that seemed a little too knowing. He said he was new in town, a musician, looking for a bartending gig. He hummed a soft, jazzy tune as he looked around, a tune that sent a cold shiver down my spine, a melody disturbingly reminiscent of Jack's old repertoire. I told him we were rent hiring. As he left, I saw him pause by the spot where the old liquor cabinet had stood, a flicker of something, recognition perhaps in his eyes before he disappeared into the French Quarter night. The hunger, I knew, would always seek a new vessel. I glanced at the antique mirror behind the bar. For a fleeting moment, I saw him, Sergeant Miller, not in torment but just watching, an unreadable expression on his face. "Do you still listen if I return later, Doc?" His voice echoed faintly in my mind, no longer an accusation, but a simple, profound question. A new spirit shimmered at the end of the bar, hesitant, their form indistinct, their sorrow a palpable ache in the air. I picked up a clean glass, the weight familiar in my hand. The thirsting veil, the thin membrane between this world and the next, was still here. And I, Noah Reyes, was its keeper, its reluctant confessor. "Rough night?" I asked, my voice softer than I intended. "Tell me about it. First drinks on the house." I paused, a grim smile touching my lips. "The real house."